In a big town, the people were divided into two distinct classes. Like any other city, this town also wobbled in balance when it came to unequal ratios of rich and poor masses. The upper side was drenched in riches, and it rained money over there. On the other side of town, people were fighting and surviving for their basic needs. The lower class part of town was home to many homeless families barely able to sustain themselves. The unfair distribution of resources and necessities promised both sides of people stagnation in the unknown future. It's not surprising that billionaires from the upper side never crossed paths with a lower-class homeless man. A stressed-out guy in his 30s named Larry was on his way to pick up her daughter from school. He loved her daughter very much and wanted to provide the best life for her. But being a daily wage worker, he couldn't afford the expensive gifts and food that his daughter might like. Even so, he tried his best to bring dinner to the table every day. There were days when there was not enough money to buy dinner for both. He would often tell his daughter he already had dinner. Larry's daughter Emma was 4 years old, and like any kid, she wanted bright, pink, sparkly things. One day, Larry and Emma were coming home from school, and on their way, when Emma saw a pretty pink bag on a store display, she pointed her fingers toward the bag and begged Larry to buy it. Larry knew how less dollars he had in his pocket. It was either Emma's dinner or bag. This was the first time Larry felt absolutely crushed because he couldn't get her daughter something as inexpensive as a school bag. Larry told her daughter how he was going to buy the bag for her birthday with a chocolate cake. Emma pouted sadly and eagerly waited for her birthday. Larry and his daughter lived in a compact flat. Larry was an employee at a local factory that produced construction materials, cement, bricks, and other things that construction companies needed. Larry and his 4-year-old daughter only had each other since his wife died suddenly due to a heart attack, leaving a vast void in his life. He made sure to play the role of mother and father, both for his young daughter. Things were working out fine for a while. He was able to bring food to the table every day for his daughter and pay her school fees. On one unfortunate morning, the factory manager laid off a bunch of guys, including Larry, because the factory was going through severe financial crises. The rising economy showed no mercy, corrupted many factories, and compelled many businesses to take a U-turn. Larry was stressed out because he had a daughter to look after. He knew he was not the best father because he could never buy her daughter the fancy pink bag she once asked for or the chocolate cake she always wanted to try from one of those fancy restaurants. Larry walked out of the factory with nothing but two $20 bills in his pocket. He sat on the side of the road, lowered his head, and sobbed. He did not have enough money to pay the rent. He kept thinking about how he had let down his daughter and how she will never live a life like other normal kids. Right there, Larry decided he would not drag his daughter onto roads and into a low, starving, homeless life. He picked up his daughter from school, went to the orphanage, and slipped a note into her tiny hands. Larry hugged her daughter tightly and kissed her all he could before parting ways with her and knocked on the door and left before the door opened. As difficult as this was, it had to be done. Larry made a promise to himself in his mind and heart that as soon as he was capable enough of feeding and proving for her daughter, he would retrieve her. Larry was quickly kicked out of his flat, which he was already prepared for. He made his shelter on the side of the road with other homeless guys like him. There was an entire community of homeless people living in the lower-class neighborhood. With increasing inflation, the economy got more complicated than ever. Many people like Larry lost the battle and accepted defeat. He went to the homeless neighborhood and slept there for 3 nights with nothing but a breezy cover. Another homeless man, Juan, saw Larry's miserable condition and helped him build his little space to keep him warm at night. It was not much, but Juan landed Larry one of his pillows and a small-sized blanket that he had collected from somewhere. Larry was grateful and made a friend during these challenging crises. Larry was a kind and ambitious man. He did not sulk and accepted his fate. He looked for a job every day. It did not matter what kind of job it was. He was willing to take it as long as he was able to provide for and be with his daughter again. After an exhausting search for a job throughout the day, Juan and Larry both used to pool their meager dollars to get some food. Some days they managed to eat, other nights they tossed and turned in their sleep due to hunger. Larry was glad to have a community. He did not feel so alone because he knew people like him were there. But a few corrupt and rowdy people earned their dinner through illegal means, often by stealing and abusing lost people from the town's upper side. Those ruffians blamed rich people for their condition. It was an entire group of 4 or 5 people who mugged wealthy billionaires who, due to misfortune, found themselves in this part of the neighborhood and were punished for their better living conditions. There were many times when Larry wanted to stop those thugs, but Juan stopped him. He told him to stay out of it, it was not worth it, and they won't listen to him. Larry felt sorry for all the people who became prey at the hand of those rowdy men. Larry lifted the sheets he draped over his compact space. It was made out of leftover wood pieces and other sturdy material that he found on the construction site, with the help of his other homeless friend, Juan. Larry went out to look for a job like every other day. It had become 4 months since he left his daughter at the door of an orphanage, and since he became homeless. He had started growing weak and scrawny. He still fought his best every day to somehow land a job that would be enough for him and his daughter. On the other side of the town, an 18-year-old was going through some problems at home. Charles ran from his home, frustrated and angry, kicking away all the houseplants on his way. His father shouted his name and told him to come back, but he was too angry to listen to him. He took his bike and rode off far to the other side of town. He was an 18-year-old boy who was very much disturbed by his parents' divorce. Ever since Charles's mother asked for a divorce, things had been tense in the household. Charles had access to everything growing up. He went to a fancy private school, went on expensive vacations thrice a year, and on top of that, his father was a billionaire. He could buy any luxury in the world, and it still won't be enough. He lacked love, care, and tenderness. Charles's father, Michael, thought being rich would solve all his problems, and his family would live happily. Charles's father gifted him a yacht on his 18th birthday. Charles invited all his rich private school friends to it, drank and partied all night. His friends were not the best people around. They encouraged Charles to do drugs, which he did. After a while, he started drinking and smoking in his home when his father was around. Charles hoped that by behaving this way, he would be able to get his father worried about him. This was his way of gaining Michael's attention, since he was seldom home. Michael had too much on his plate. He was busy expanding his business throughout the town and overlooked his son's needs. Charles' irrational behavior escalated, and things got out of hand. It was safe to say that at that point, Charles was spoiled and frustrated. He hung out with his wealthy friends every day, and most of the time, they indulged in illegal activity of all sorts, like shoplifting, drugs, and speed driving. Charles was alone for most of the day. Only his housekeeper looked after him. His father was busy minting money for the family and paid little attention to him. His mother wanted nothing to do with him. Under the rich, spoiled exterior, Charles was a very lonely kid. He unknowingly rode off to the lower-class neighborhood of the town. Charles pulled out a cigarette and smoked while strolling through the neighborhood. He was too stunned and wide-eyed because he never knew this part of town even existed. He was living in his own little bubble and never saw how people were living so miserably before. He saw more than 40 people living as homeless. He felt a pang of pity in his heart for them. He was spoiled, but he never realized how many unfortunate and underprivileged people were in the town. Charles looked posh. He was wearing a shiny silver watch and a black leather jacket with branded sneakers. At that time, Charles felt helpless because he had no control over his life and his family situation. So he decided to take control of his feelings. He chose to do drugs and knew these people would sell him some. He had the money, and these people needed it. He went to the homeless guy sitting on the roadside and asked him if he could sell him some marijuana. The homeless guy was drunk and did not answer him. Charles went on to other people, hoping someone would help him out. He felt more and more frustrated, so he picked up his bike and decided to leave. Just then, he was stopped by the neighborhood thugs. The thugs spotted him from afar because he looked rich and shiny. They decided to steal his money and punish him for being rich. This was their way of rationalizing their living condition was not improving because they had never tried bettering them. The ruffians pulled him by his leather jacket collar and snatched the money out of his pockets. Other guys started punching and kicking him. They showed no mercy. Charles shouted for help, but no one moved from their places to help him out. People knew these thugs wouldn't think twice before beating them too. Larry saw from the side of the road how this 18-year-old boy was being beaten brutally, and no one was even flinching. He immediately ran to his aid. He told Juan he wouldn't sit and watch a boy get beaten to death for no reason. He stood up, took a long wooden bat with him, and confronted the thugs. Larry asked those guys to leave that boy alone. They paid no attention to him. Larry pushed away one big guy from the boy and sat beside him to see if he was okay. Charles's face was covered in bruises. He also had a broken rib. Larry knew he had to take this poor boy to the hospital. He called Juan to help him move the boy. The thugs did not care so much. They got the money and his shiny belongings. They were set for a few days. Larry went to the nearby diner and used their telephone to call for an ambulance. The ambulance arrived soon enough, and Larry and Juan both went with Charles to the hospital. Larry tried to get some information out of this boy to call his family and let them know where he was. Charles could only tell his name, but he handed Larry his cell phone and then went unconscious. Larry felt a little scared because he knew this kid was rich. He knew for a fact that the law and order situation in this part of town was not that praiseworthy. He was afraid that the police would blame him for Charles's condition. Larry knew running off and leaving this poor boy alone would not be the right thing to do, so he stayed. He brought painkillers from the pharmacy, which cost him nearly $100. He earned these dollars the same day he worked as a laborer to carry heavy sacks of sand and cement. Larry was a kind man. He did not hesitate when he slipped the dollar bill across the counter. He also called Charles's father to let him know he was admitted to the hospital. Larry waited for Charles to wake up. He had a bandage over his forehead and fractures on his ribs and lower arm. Charles opened his eyes and scanned the room to see if anything was familiar to him. He groaned in pain and saw Larry pass out from exhaustion on the couch. He felt so grateful for this kind man who saved his life even though they had never met. He was humble enough to stand up for him when no one bothered to help him. He felt very lucky to be alive and decided to change his outlook on life. Charles saw Larry and realized that even though Larry has nothing to give, he offered Charles kindness, whereas he had everything and yet felt so ungrateful and rebellious. He asked himself, why couldn't he change his behavior and use his resources for the better, like helping and giving to charity? Charles's father, Michael, barged through the door, worrying and panting. Larry woke up and rubbed his eyes to make sense of what was happening. He saw Charles's father, Michael, had arrived. Charles expressed his guilt and told his dad how sorry he was for running off like that and getting into trouble. Michael hugged his child and told him he was sorry for putting him through so much because of the divorce. Both father and son found common ground and accepted their mistakes. They both promised to do better in the future. Michael hugged Larry despite his greasy hair and stained clothes. Michael thanked Larry for his kindness and generosity when he bore all the medical expenses. Despite having so little, he saved his son's life. As a thank you, Michael offered Larry an open check to fulfill all his needs and get whatever he wanted. Larry was moved by the billionaire's grand effort. Michael asked him where he had found his son. Larry told him he lived on the same street where Charles was beaten up by street thugs. Larry told Michael about how he had been homeless for the past 5 months and how he had to leave her 4-year-old daughter at the orphanage because he had no money to provide for her. Michael consoled Larry and told him to get his daughter back from the orphanage and start fresh. Michael promised Larry he would bear his daughter's institution fees and help him find a suitable job. Larry cried happy tears because he would finally be reunited with his daughter. He missed her every day and wished for her nothing more than to have her in his arms again. The next day, Larry got a chocolate brownie for her daughter and went ahead to pick her up from the orphanage with a big smile on his face. He felt a little nervous because how is he going to face her? He knocked on the door and asked for her daughter. The lady who opened the door invited him in and asked why he had dropped off his daughter in an orphanage. Larry told her all about what had transpired in the last 5 months and filled her in on his living condition. The lady immediately remembered his daughter, Emma. When Emma entered the orphanage, she had a note in her hand that said, "Forgive me, sweetheart. Daddy will come for you. I promise." The lady brought Emma to Larry, and the little girl cried as he saw her father smiling brightly. He ran and threw herself in her father's arms. Larry clung to her little girl and was glad that things worked out. And now he could finally give her the life he always wanted to give. Emma started her schooling, and her tuition fees were paid by Michael as promised. Larry did not want to live off Michael's check, so he only bought a reasonable flat from the blank check, and once again started looking for a job. Michael knew that Larry was a responsible and hardworking man, and he did not enjoy living off the money given to him, so Michael also started looking for jobs for Larry. A few weeks later, Michael formed a team of constructors and builders solely responsible for renovating and building firms and establishments under his business wing. Larry received a call from Michael, and he told him all about his idea of forming a team. Larry accepted the job and worked for Michael on good pay. Things started looking up for this kind man. His kindness was returned, and now his daughter Emma lived a happy and comfortable life. It was Emma's 5th birthday when Larry gifted her a pink bag she once begged for, and he couldn't afford it. Larry's heart fluttered when he saw the biggest smile on his daughter's face while cutting the birthday cake in her favorite restaurant.